Hi everyone and welcome back. This is Disability Saves the World with Dr. Fadi Shenouda. I am Fadi Shenouda. This podcast brings you insights from leading experts in disability and MAD studies from around the world. You'll hear about the research and work of disabled scholars, activists, artists, and our allies. You'll also get some insight into their lives, their favorite non-DS activities, hobbies, and adventures. Most importantly, you'll get to hear how they think disability can save the world. My name again is Fadi Shenouda. I use he, him pronouns. I have a PhD in public health sciences, and I am currently a postdoc in London in the UK. I identify as a fat, disabled, cis man of color. If you don't know me, hopefully you'll get to know me over the course of the next few episodes. So, on today's show, I am joined by Dr. Sona Kazemi. Sona, who uses she, her pronoun, is a postdoctoral fellow in the English department, as well as in the Mershon Center for International Security Studies at Ohio State University in Columbus. Sona has a manuscript called Disabling Relations, Injured Body Minds, and Active Witnessing, which is currently under review at New York University Press and should be coming out next year sometime, so look out for it. Sona is also the global section co-editor for RDS, or Review Disability Studies Journal. They're accepting papers for the first time from non-English submissions, so both research papers and non-academic work. There's a link to the CFP attached to the notes. I'm delighted to be speaking with Sona about her work.
So I kind of decided to take that upon myself and create a new model for understanding injury.
Her life outside of academia.
To mystic poetry and Sufi poetry, paint a couple of dervishes on a canvas.
And intrigued to find out how she thinks disability can save the world. Okay, hi Sona.
Hi Fadi.
Thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
You are the first person to come on from the U.S., even though you're not a U.S. citizen, but you're currently in the U.S.
Yes.
How are things going there?
Unfortunately, because of this unprecedented time that we are dealing with this global pandemic, of course, there is really anxiety and stress in the air, especially with uncertainty that's going on. But it's also, I think, a very good opportunity for people to start thinking about the pre-corona and the post-corona world that we live in.
Right.
Yeah, and the things that we could learn from this situation.
Absolutely. So, let's get right into the first segment. I call this first segment Inside the Project, the research, the work, the art. And I'd like to ask you, how did you get involved with disability studies, with MAD studies? How did you first learn about it?
I think that's a wonderful question. Disability is my passion, and I fell in love with it when I was 6 years old, or perhaps 5, when for the first time I saw a disabled child around my age. And that encounter kind of fascinated me, and I've been fascinated with this field since then. When I moved to Canada from Iran due to forced migration, basically I was pushed out, or I should say I escaped. I was almost 20 years old, and I had already gone to an international university, and I had studied 3 years of pure mathematics.
Wow.
Yeah, when I got to Canada, I decided to go after my passion and do something with my love for disability. And I went to George Brown College first, and I told them, and I asked them, do you have anything that, a field that involves some sort of work with disabled folks or something around disability? They said they had like child and youth work and other sorts of, community, basically social service degrees, but
Yeah.
that would be irrelevant to math. So they wouldn't accept any of my credits. So I basically started from scratch. Yeah, I started with a diploma in child and youth work, just like a person out of high school. I started doing that. And then after a year, I transferred my credits to York and I did a degree in psychology, which then was kind of a pathway for me to go into a critical disability studies program that was at York University at the time. And that changed my life.
What an amazing journey. I mean, what an amazing story. So I want to talk a little bit about you use the word like escape, and as someone who's also an immigrant and I guess was also forced
Yes.
out of
Hmm.
Egypt, where I'm
Hmm.
originally from.
Hmm.
I'm just wondering, and I know you speak very passionately online and on the various social media platforms about Iran and what's happening there. I felt like I should give you some space to kind of talk about, what was going on, why the need to move, why the forced migration.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you so much for giving me that opportunity. Yes, I so much care about what's going on in Iran. Besides my passion for the whole world, but like you mentioned, when we are immigrants, and you know the experience, we are always immigrants. I mean, at
Yeah.
least that's that's for me. I mean, once an immigrant, always an immigrant. Yes, I do passionately care about what's going on in Iran. And in fact, I had to escape because of the living conditions that the current theocratic fundamentalist regime has created for us, and the forced veiling and basically living under a what I have come to call cleric fascist regime,
Right.
kind of pushed us out, or something I called gender apartheid, that is going on there. Well, people in Iran rose up for justice and freedom and democracy. Unfortunately, that rise was hijacked by one religious group, and we ended up with this situation that the world has been witnessing for the past 41 years. Yes, me and my family, my mom, my grandparents, my uncle, we all have kind of escaped. Um, and what really is pressing to mention, I think, the coronavirus crisis that's going on in Iran with like really full force,
Mhm.
and the government is not even declaring like a proper quarantine, and they're in fact talking about going back to work when it's everyone knows that's absolutely stupid, given the circumstances that we haven't even reached the peak yet, according to what scientists are telling us. So those are good lessons for us to maybe think about, how secularism is different from living under a theocracy. Often we take it for granted. We don't understand what it is to live under a theocracy. But
Yeah.
it's important, especially at times like this, when we really need science to tell us what to do, when we stick to holy orders, then that creates a problem, like it has created in Iran.
Yeah, and of course, like we have to, of course, make the similar connections in the states themselves. When you have the president saying we'll be back by Easter, you have a university called Liberty University, which is essentially an evangelical
Exactly.
university, opening up and saying the will of God will save us. I'm not denying
Absolutely.
that religion can't play a role in this, of course, but public health experts are clearly worried about people going back too early, right? Because it'll just
Absolutely.
exasperate healthcare. Thank you for
Exactly.
that, for
Exactly.
bringing like a more kind of global perspective to what's happening. I want to get into your topic, the area of research that you do. Can you tell us, yeah, what topic did you
Mhm.
want to talk about today?
Absolutely. I'd love to talk about perhaps my upcoming book, the book project that I'm working on that has to do with my current research. I was born in the middle of Iran-Iraq War, and I grew up in a post-war society. And what that means, it might not mean a lot to a lot of folks who haven't lived in situations like that. So what that means basically is that you have a lot of war veterans around you. And you
Right.
also have a lot of civilians who have become disabled as a result of chemical weapons that Iraqi state used against us civilians, especially Kurdish and Azeri civilians in north west of Iran. We actually, I think, had around 1,077,000 disabled veterans in Iran, and that's a large number. You see it everywhere. And then you are living in a post-war world that has a story to tell. And one, of course, is a state story. One is collective memory, and one is the wound that I call gaping wound, this open mouth of the wound that you have to live with. So that kind of inspired me to always think about injury. Injury not as an accident, not as something that you're born with, like a congenital condition or something like an accident, but injury, something deliberate, something that happens, something that's organized, socially organized, politically organized, and is designed to harm and to design and is designed to injure. So that kind of brought me to do my doctoral dissertation on war. And I kind of tried to conceptualize a new model and theory for disability studies that understands injury from a quote unquote third world perspective. That's basically what I have been trying to do, because when I entered the field of disability studies, imagine a girl who has grown up in a post-war society with what war veterans and witnessing so much pain, suddenly coming to a field called disability studies that doesn't talk about those bodies that I have witnessed all my life. I
Yeah.
came to see a field that's extremely bourgeois, is very white, is very global northern focused, and doesn't really care about where I'm coming from and what my experience has been with disability. So I kind of decided to take that upon myself and create a new model for understanding injury from my perspective.
I mean, it's so, I mean, it's fascinating, compelling, necessary work, right? In
Thank you.
understanding the different relationships that people have with disability. This I the representational
Hmm.
identity politics, pride
Mm,
narratives don't always work. Right. And of course, that
exactly.
goes outside of disability towards other identities as well. But disability specifically, I want to know why the word injury, because I think a lot of people would associate injury with accident, maybe
Hmm.
incorrectly. Were
Mm.
there other kind of versus like example, for in other words, like harm? So yeah, why injury specifically?
Well, like Dr. Mary Jean Handy, that whom you interviewed, in her brilliant words, people whom she interviewed told her that they were broken down.
Mm,
I think this is really similar to the case that I'm making here, because we are both on the path of defetishizing disablement, and which I can explain further what that means. I think that exactly what the activist told Mary Jean is very similar to what I have been hearing from the populations that I have been working with. This injury is something deliberate, is to mention that this is not an accident. You know, usually when somebody goes to war and comes back, for example, with one leg instead of two legs, we call them an injured soldier,
yeah.
right? Or in my other examples, I worked with acid attack survivors in
Mhm.
Iran who basically have gone blind because acid was thrown on their face by a
Mostly
rejected
women, right?
lover. Mostly women, yes, yes. Perpetrators are men and women, but again, mostly men, and the victims are mostly women, but there
Yeah.
are some men victims as well. Or I work with, I research the lives of people who have lost a limb to punitive amputation for robbery that happens in Iran and Saudi Arabia, according to Sharia laws, basically being punished for being poor, becoming disabled as a punishment. Um, and other example is people that I research on are people who have gone to prison and have gone quote unquote mad under torture and have become someone that their loved ones don't recognize anymore. This I have come to call a wound. I have come to call this an injury, something that uh, is done to another person just because of the unequal power relations that exist in the equation.
I mean that yeah, I think that example, those all those examples are kind of potentially more removed from our, especially North American understandings of disability, right? We don't
Absolutely.
see acid attacks here. We don't. War is very much, I think, removed from a lot of us, especially Canadians, right? Injury during war.
Hmm.
So it's really interesting that you're bringing this into the fold, these groups of people who may not even constitute themselves disabled, right? May use other terms like injured. That does, yeah, there isn't room for them in contemporary disability studies, and I feel like you're making up that room. So thank you. I
Yeah,
mean,
of course.
I'm wondering if there is like an underlying theory or an underlying framework that you use to help you think about your work. I think some of what you said reminds me of a little bit of what Puar is trying to do in Palestine.
Hmm.
But I wonder if, you distinguish yourself in some way. Um,
Absolutely. I do. Yeah,
yeah,
I think Jasbir Puar's work is very, very important. And in fact, my work is a little bit different from Jasbir, and I can explain why. Um, uh, in her recent incredible work, The Right to Maim, she has problematized the white and Western nature of disability studies, and rightfully so.
yeah.
And basically, its tendency to naturalize the debilitating conditions under which global Southern people are forced to live and get disabled on a daily basis. And specifically, she works on Palestinian population who live under a settler colonial state. In my example, I totally acknowledge her problematizing West and whiteness as inseparable norms, of course, of disability studies. But I'm afraid that would dissolve the difference that disability makes in the concept of debility. So what I mean by that is that Jasbir uh, argues rightfully that people in Gaza, for example, in open air prison, they live under debilitating conditions. I totally understand that, but even in that debilitating conditions, similar to which I have lived in post war Iran, there is still a difference between a person with two legs and a person with one leg.
Mhm.
So what I'm trying to say is that I'm afraid that the concept of disability can get dissolved into the concept of debility, and that's what worries me about this concept of debility. Other than that, what I problematize is also state violence in my work, just like Poir does. But in my case, I am not questioning an occupier. I'm questioning the theocratic fundamentalist regime that is running the country under corruption and under brutality and atrocities. So, in that case, my work is a little bit different from what Puar does. And I I think we need to go beyond Palestine. Palestine is really important, but the whole global south is not just Palestine. We need to also think about other contexts, such as the
So
ones that I'm talking about.
So I'll just say, first of all, thank you for explaining pu'er, not just to the audience, but to me also.
Sure.
It's very helpful. But also, I think that you like the distinction that you're making is so significant. Like it's like this idea that d disability might be swallowed up, right, by debility, that
Mhm.
it'll lose its differentness. Um,
Mhm.
and the embodied experience that comes with that, right? The different relations that a disabled person has with other bodies, humans, non-humans, right? That
Exactly.
that someone who is not disabled but maybe experiencing disability will of course have different relationships. Is there someone that you do lean on, a theory or a practice or a set of scholars that you do engage with in your work?
Yes, yes, that's a very good question. First of all, I engage with Marx a lot. I consider myself a Marxist, a feminist, and anti-theocracy. And I think that's a very important distinction I need to make because a lot of people on the left have kind of turned away from looking at what theocracy can do because they are afraid of being politically incorrect.
Right.
So that is my struggle in my own work to make them see what is actually going on under a theocratic state. Um, yeah, so I use Marx, especially because of his theory of political economy and also ideology and abstraction alienation. I'm really interested in those concepts. I use dialectical historical materialism in my own work that I call DHM in short form, which is a basis for the model that I created for disability scholars to use. I called it transnational model of disability, or TMD, which is a theory based on dialectical historical materialism, and I can explain that further if it comes up. In this work, I, of course, stand on the shoulders of giants in the field. My dear friend and external examiner of my dissertation, Dr. Nirmala Eravelis, and my dear beloved mentor of the past decade, Dr. Rachel da Silveira Gorman, who has really guided my thinking around disability and injury for many, many years. And of course, my dear Mary Jean Handy, who has introduced the concept of red disability studies to us. My mentors here, Dr. Amy Schumann and Dr. Margaret Price, have also shaped my thinking in profound ways, both in theory and praxis. I have not only learned from them how to basically be a good scholar, perhaps, but also how to be a good mentor and how much care that they have given me. I have learned also that to give my students. So I think that's also something that I needed to acknowledge.
That's wonderful. Those are giants, and I'm so glad that I know some of them. So that's really good. How do you do this work? Are you interviewing people? Are you looking at policy documents? What is your methodology?
In my work, the methodology that I use, because I organize with a lot of these populations that I mentioned myself in person. For example, I organize with prison survivors who have gone through unimaginable torture in the 80s under the Islamic Republic in Iran. A lot of them live in the diaspora. They are part of what they call justice-seeking movement for the massacre of political prisoners that the regime did in 1988, where it killed nearly 5,000 political prisoners who had already served their sentence, just decided to try them again and just execute them. For that, justice-seeking movement has been established, and many of the members are prison survivors or their loved ones died in prison. I have been organizing with them as a therapist, as a political ally, and as a researcher. Um, that is my relationship to that population. The other population, acid survivors, I also organize with them in their justice seeking movement. I connect them to doctors for surgeries, for dental work, because a lot of these people live in absolute poverty because the state doesn't care about them, and because after they, for example, lost their sight. One of them was a hairdresser. She lost both eyes, and now she cannot do what she used to do, and she cannot live with like a very little money. So basically, I've been trying to connect these people to doctors who would be willing to do their surgeries pro bono. Um, and I have again connected them to other disability activists in the UK who would, for example, provide housing if one of them would go to the UK for a surgery. That is the kind of work that I do in relation to this population. And for the other ones, my relationship, for example, punitive limb amputation or war veterans, is simply archival research, where I just research their living conditions. I do digital studies where I just read their comments on social media or just connect to their stories in different platforms, and I try to bring them to light.
I mean, this sounds like such meticulous work. Serious, clearly, it's activism as well. I look forward to reading the book. I look forward to teaching your model of disability. I think it's going to make a significant contribution. I can't wait for it. Again, it's called Disabling Relations, Injured Body Minds, and Active Witnessing. At least that is the current title.
Yes.
It might change, but it most likely will stay the same.
Yeah, the book is going to have 5 chapters, or basically, I should say maybe 6, including the active witnessing part that I will reflect on at the end. I call it Active Revolutionary Knowledge and Praxis, where I actually talk about what it is to be an active witness as opposed to a witness that's just sitting there and just watching what's happening, but actually acting upon your knowledge and making a difference in the lives of people you study.
Yeah.
That would be the concluding part. But at the beginning, the first chapter, I've called it "Ripping the Wound," where I actually talk about my model. Then I talk about Iran-Iraq war injury, which I've come to call "Gaping Wounds." Then I talk about going mad under torture and state violence, which I've called to come "Rotten Wounds." And I do a comparative study between what has gone in Iran and what has gone in Auschwitz under Nazi fascism. And then I come to Iranian Arab amputees convicted of robbery, which I've come to call bleeding wounds. And my last chapter, which is on patriarchal violence in the case of acid attack, I've come to call burning wounds. So as you
Wow.
see, I have, I've come to kind of organize around the concept of wound
Yeah.
and what it means to actually have this open wound that you have to deal with. I think that kind of changes the ways in which we approach disability in the global north as well.
Again, can't wait for it to come out and to be able to kind of see what you came up with, see what you've witnessed, how you've approached it, and to learn from you.
Thank you so
I'm,
much.
yeah, I'm just really looking forward to it. And in some ways, I think you can potentially write a 7th chapter, though I won't push you, about COVID and, what you could write the virus wound. I can imagine what's going to happen to Iran during
Yeah.
this time.
I think that's a fantastic suggestion. I totally agree. It's funny you said that because you know how disability community like have been saying since this COVID-19 started. They've been saying, "Oh, we know this shit. We have been living with this for so many years." I mean,
Yeah,
they know the conditions of poverty, of precarity, of having to live on very little money and uh, not being able to access the world because the world is inaccessible. And a
yeah,
lot of these struggles are something that these people know. Something similar happened to me. I mean, I was reading through these things and I realized that a lot of my comrades in the Iranian movement who are disabled state survivors of violence, who were in prison in the 80s, They're saying we lived in our little isolated cells for
Mm.
years. Right? I mean, it was interesting to see the connection. They said, "Oh, exactly. We agree with our disabled, comrades. That's exactly what happened to us. We paid a price for just wanting justice and freedom peacefully. We were just dissidents, but then we had to be in solitary confinement for months and often years. And this is something that we are familiar with. So I thought that was interesting."
These are beautiful connections that I hope we'll be able to make. And when I say beautiful, I mean that there's kind of an intimacy in knowing that other people have, lived, survived, thrived after these
Exactly.
conditions, right? Um,
Exactly.
so I want to move into segment two, what I call the middle or the liminal space. Who is your academic crush? Who can you not stop reading?
I love that question. Actually, my academic crush is Dr. Shokufe Saki. I will spell her name. It's Shokoufeh. Last name is Saki. Sakhi. Dr. Seki actually did her PhD in Toronto, actually at York University in 2014. She's in political science, of course, with flying colors. Dr. Seki was a political dissident in Iran who was imprisoned for 8 years under the Islamic Republic for just being a peaceful dissident. She got arrested around the age of 18 and remained in prison until she was 26, while her parents looked after her 1 year old son.
Wow.
Uh, yes, she was held in coffin like conditions for 8.5 months in Ghezelhesar prison. But she refused to collaborate with the regime. She refused to harm her comrades, and that's why they held her in that coffin-like conditions for 9 months. She came out eventually and left Iran with her son. She now lives in Canada, and she is a wonderful scholar. She did her dissertation on sensory deprivation and active resistance.
That is an amazing story, and I'm sure her work is incredible. I look forward to researching it myself. It's too bad that I didn't get to meet her when I was at U of T. That's unfortunate.
Yeah, she's actually at York. Yeah, I hear it. But Shekufe is extremely kind and generous, and she served as the executive director of Iranian People's Tribunal that was held in Hague to hold the regime accountable to its crimes against humanity, which was a symbolic tribunal. Of course, the regime is in power, so there wouldn't be any real, international law tribunal, but still, just like Russell's tribunal, where Jean-Paul Sartre and Bertrand Russell tried to hold the U.S. government accountable for their crimes against humanity in Vietnam, they also went ahead as a grassroots justice organization and held this tribunal. Shekufe served as the executive director of that and has written on grassroots justice making. I highly encourage your listeners to read about her work as Justice from Below, which is something that we really need to understand, as opposed to justice from above, which is this very bourgeois concept of relying on states to make a difference. She basically shows us how we are the only ones who can actually make a difference.
Well, it sounds like a remarkable scholar, and I do look forward to looking at their work. So, next question. Your advice for younger academics or students. Do you have anything to pass along?
I would say be courageous,
Hmm.
go after truth. Do not be afraid of going after controversial topics. Truth is the light that brightens our pathway. Always seek the truth and do not be afraid, because fear is something that doesn't that hinders our access to truth. Do not be afraid. Go for it. Truth will be waiting for you.
Is this coming from kind of a personal experience? Were you discouraged from researching something or looking at something?
Dr. Shanuda, you may be a therapist as well. That was an incredible question. Yes. Well, I lived under theocracy, like I said, for 20 years. I went to prison at the age of 14. They arrested me for not wearing a proper hijab. They held me in a cell for a whole day without access to water, bathroom, or food. I My experience, I think, with a system that has no freedom of speech, no freedom of information. You're basically blocked from accessing information. You're blocked from knowing what people went through before you, who rose up for justice. For example, when I grew up in Iran, I did not know about what had happened in the 80s, how many people had been executed by the state, how many people had lost their minds under torture. We are never supposed to ask and know these things. When I come here, people discourage me from talking about those things because, of course, they say, oh, then that would justify a war against Iran, or that would just justify what George Bush claimed that he was doing, that he was on a feminist mission to rescue Afghan women. Well, he wasn't. But that doesn't mean that the fight against fundamentalism and theocracy and Islamic fascism in the region is not actually happening. There is a
Right.
fight happening. There is a gender apartheid in Iran and in Saudi Arabia. There is a struggle for freedom for women. There is an anti mandatory hijab struggle by women in Iran. These fights are real. It's interesting that in both concepts, I was discouraged from talking about it. But yes, you got me. It is personal experience, and I have decided to be fierce, like women who struggled for democracy and justice in Iran, just like Shekufe herself. I have learned to perhaps pay the price for it as well with with my sanity, but I guess we just cannot stand down. This is a real fight.
Yeah, and I think the problem is that there can be two truths, right? There can be the real issue of going to war with Iran and the fear that that brings and the harm that that will bring, but that also that the current state of, the government in Iran might also be very violent. And those two truths, I think, are sometimes people want things more simple. And you're saying the simplicity isn't helpful. It's actually quite
Exactly.
harmful.
I think that's what I'm doing. I'm complicating the issue, and I'm
Yeah.
saying there is a war in Iran. We have been at war with this state for the past 41 years. War is nothing new for us Iranians. And
Mm,
as a Marxist, I would say people make their own history, even though they might not make it as they please, given the circumstance from the past. But we make our own history. This regime has been at war with us for the past 41 years. U.S. is an outsider, but the whole world is not an outsider. There is international solidarity. There was international solidarity when people suffered under South African apartheid. There is international solidarity with Palestinian people under BDS movement, for example. So why isn't there any solidarity with Iranian people? As if
yeah.
people cannot show any solidarity to people. Of course they can, and we have been at war. War is nothing new for us. We just want the world to care about our cause because we are a hostage in the hands of this regime that just is engaged in competing regional imperialism with US and Russia and other powers, is engaged in proxy wars in Syria and in Iraq, and just wants to expand itself. It's just another imperialist power.
And I think the advice of being true, being courageous, moving forward, thinking freely is really important for young people nowadays because there are lots of questions that we have, right? That we need kind of free thinkers
Exactly.
to examine. Yeah.
Exactly. For example, I questioned, like yesterday, I posted something that created so much controversy on Facebook. I said, why can we talk about Zionism but not Shi'i fascism? Why can
Yeah.
we talk about BDS but not uh, Iranian women's struggle against mandatory hijab, which has been going on for the past 41 years? That is something that I wonder. I mean, how do we pick and choose the movements that we want to be in solidarity with? How can we transnationalize social movements? How can we understand that Islamophobia might be a problem in the West, but it's not a problem in the Middle East? In fact, Islamophilia is a problem there. So we cannot have this white guilt and apply our universal notion of what constitutes violence to other parts of the world and start undermining the real struggles that are happening in those places.
Amazing, compelling stuff. Moving on to segment 3. I call this Outside the Project, the research, the work, the art. I want to know who's the most famous person you've met and what was that like? Or who is the most memorable person that you've met?
One of the people that I very, very respect, but I have only met online. His name is Iraj Mesdaghi, Irajmesdaghi. Iraj Mesdaghi also served in prison for 10 years under Islamic Republic from 1981 to 1991 and has written 22 books about his experience and beyond and hundreds of articles. There is a book of his
Oh
that
my
was written.
God.
I know, right? He's just unbelievable. I
Prolific,
tell him,
yeah.
I know. Because he's so passionate about his witnessing, and this is an example of active witnessing that I've been trying to talk about. Because he witnessed his comrades getting executed in a matter of days, as easy as that. This mass
Mm.
atrocity that he witnessed, he took it up on himself. He decided to never let them go and always keep their memory. And that remembering is an active witnessing project that he's engaged with. One of his books was translated into English recently, which is something that I'm really excited about. So the English speaking world can read it. It's called Torture in the Name of Allah. Translated and edited by Sepehr Manochehri. It's SEPEHRMANOCHEHR. It's called A Shocking Real Truth on the Pervasive Use of Torture by Islamic Regime in Iran. It is a very important book. It's very well researched. Honestly, I think if Iraj had done this as a dissertation, he would have received his doctorate long ago.
Wow, that's both famous person and almost a book recommendation. So that's great. Um,
That's right.
I want to know, do you carry around an obscure fact?
I think I talk about politics. Yeah, I think it's funny that this came up because, the constitutional revolution in Iran, again, bring me back to this Iran thing. Constitutional revolution was kind of the first attempt for democracy in the global south. Arguably, there was one group under Ottoman Empire who also rose for justice, so it could be at the same time. But the way that these guys were organized, this is around 1910 and 1911. So I'm coming from a culture that initiated the first rise for democracy in the global south, and arguably 1979 revolution was the last revolution that we have experienced in the world in terms of like conventional, like real revolution, not a green movement or anything like that. So it's funny that we were unveiled mandatory at some point, and then we were veiled mandatory at some point, and we have had this women's movement going on for centuries. So I think I am coming from a very political culture, and maybe that's why I have a partner who is very political. So I think that's what I would like throw in. Like I would say, what's up in Iran, man? Let's talk about the supreme leader's hedge fund that's untaxable.
You're like, want to hear an obscure fact about Iran? I got 70 of them. Here you go.
Exactly, exactly.
What are you reading now? Are you reading any kind of non-academic work or, anything that's not related to your developing of your book?
Something that I really love and I read constantly as a living text, something that is always there for me, and it seems like I can never get over it, is a book called Ghosts of Revolution, Rekindled Memories of Political Imprisonment in Iran by my dear mentor, Shahla Talebi, Shahla Talebi, who is Associate Professor of Anthropology and Religious Studies in Arizona State University. You wouldn't believe me, but she wrote this book as her undergraduate thesis, and it came out with Stanford University Press and is a masterpiece on conceptualizing madness under torture in Iran in the 80s, where she was imprisoned for 9 years herself, and she was, in fact, cellmates with Shekufe Saki.
Wow. So they know each other quite well then.
They know each other, they are friends, and I love them both very much. I've learned a lot from them, and I continue to learn. I basically these people are like my mentors in academia and in life, and I really value activism, as you know. And because these people, all three people that I mentioned, Iraj, Shahla, and Shekufe, all three of them have been in prison from 8 to 10 years, and just for being peaceful dissidents. And they have paid a high price with their body minds for justice, for just the idea of no poverty, for just the idea of freedom of speech. So I highly respect activists who produce knowledge rather than the other way around,
Yeah.
because I think materiality is nothing without consciousness. Consciousness is nothing without materiality. So I think the unity of those two is what I value the most in consciousness around social justice.
What hobby do you enjoy more than anything else? And when did you start doing it?
I am a big fan of Persian poetry.
Okay.
We are, yeah, we are in fact a nation of poem-loving nation, as we call ourselves. We can't even help ourselves. Even in our daily talks, we cite poems
Oh, wow.
from, yeah, from Rumi, Hafiz, Sadi. So I think reading poetry, part of who I am since I was 14, 13. Even earlier, I engaged in it. I also love dance. I dance. I was a dance instructor for 10 years, and very typical Middle Eastern of me, I belly dance. Uh, just
Hey,
to fit to
it is
Orientalist.
super hard to belly dance. That is like a skill unto its own.
That is true, and it's very hot. I love it.
Yeah. It is when you say how you mean like it's very sexy. It is, yes, yeah.
That's exactly what I mean. But I used to. I used to. Nowadays, sometimes I get into mystic poetry and Sufi poetry, which I love. And sometimes I paint a couple of dervishes on a canvas
Oh,
who are
wow.
dancing and whirling, like the dervishes that Rumi has told us about. Or I just giggle with my mom on the phone
I
and
think
my
all of
grandparents.
those sound like all worthwhile activities. So I wanna end by asking you the seminal question for this kind of podcast, which is, how do you think disability can save the world?
I think disability can definitely save the world because it is a valuable teacher. Disability teaches us to resist, teaches us to love ourselves, teaches us to question the normative culture, to question the ways in which things are set up. It makes us question the barriers, daily barriers that we have to live with, and teaches us that those are reversible. Those are changeable. Nothing is fixed. It teaches us that we don't need to fit the world. The world needs to fit us.
That is a beautiful ending to a wonderful conversation. I hope you had a good time on the podcast. Thank you for coming on. I really appreciate
Absolutely.
it.
I really enjoyed. It was kind of resuscitating moment for me, responding to your questions, and I already feel a lot better. I mean, that was a therapeutic experience for me. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you for sharing with us what you've learned. I appreciate it.
Of course.
Thanks again to Sona for coming on the show and for a wonderful and intriguing conversation. If you'd like to get in touch with me about the podcast, please reach out at disabilitysavestheworld.com. This podcast is hosted, produced, and edited by me, Fady Shenouda. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time on Disability Saves the World.